it could be a pretty exciting evening for you. It's been a very interesting day for all of us here in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. Even though there has been a news blackout after the first full day of the summit meeting between Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev, there are, dare we say, heavy hints in the air that they are making some headway, particularly on the subject of arms control. Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev had about 50 minutes with each other this morning, only their interpreters and their note-takers there, and then at this afternoon session, which lasted for about 2.5 hours, they were accompanied by their Secretary of State, in Mr. Reagan's case, and the Soviet Foreign Minister with Mr. Gorbachev. And then late today, it was announced that the two delegations, without the leaders, would have some bilateral discussions, one on the subject of human rights and the other on the question of arms control. And it is this bilateral meeting between the Soviet and the American delegations tonight on arms control, which quite frankly has caught everybody's interest here. Standing by with us in Reykjavik is our foreign affairs correspondent, Barry Dunsmore. Barry, what does this bilateral meeting tonight suggest to you?
Well, Peter, the fact that they have bothered to publicly announce the fact that there are going to be some working groups taking place tonight suggests to me that Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan have actually come to some general understanding. Now the staff is working to put some flesh on those ideas. They didn't have to make this public, so I think we can reasonably assume that some kind of an agreement is at least at hand.
We appear to be talking about some kind of an agreement or framework for an agreement about intermediate-range nuclear missiles, right?
Yes, you can't really throw together a serious arms control agreement in a few hours. So at very best, what they will be able to do is to put together a roadmap which the negotiators in Geneva can follow. And whether that roadmap is actually going anywhere significant, we won't be able to tell until they show it to us.
Okay, Barry, we quite often get tips on what the Soviets are thinking from our Eastern European journalistic colleagues. What are you picking up from them?
Very interesting, Peter. As a matter of fact, one of the signals I was getting today is that at least some Eastern European countries are telling their people that Gorbachev is in trouble, that he really needs something here, and that he'll grab onto almost anything.
Okay, Barry, thanks very much for joining us. We will be here for the remainder of the evening in case there are any developments. We'll have a full wrap-up on an extended version of the weekend report, and then we'll be here all day Sunday for the second meeting, and perhaps even an appearance by Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev. Thanks very much for joining us. Back to the game in just a minute.
By the time you're watching this, Trump and Putin will have both arrived at Joint Base Elmendorf in Alaska to begin their summit meeting, in which the objective, from the American side at least, will be to negotiate an end to the current Russia-Ukraine war, which, strictly speaking, didn't begin in February of 2022. It began all the way back in 2014, so it's more instructive to view the thing as a two-act war with a 6-year interbellum period in the middle, in much the same way that many historians now view the world wars as a single conflict with a 20-year armistice in between. The current Russia-Ukraine conflict first began when the Barack Obama administration, hi Hillary, hi Susan, interfered in the Ukrainian election with a mind to making Kiev into a U.S. client and turning the country into an outpost of American-style liberalism. That was the animating cause of Putin's first invasion. His territorial objectives were something he could backfill in as a justification because he didn't want to come right out and say, yeah, this is a war against U.S. election meddling and cultural imperialism. Even though it very much was, and it very much still is. If the Biden-Obama regime had left Ukraine the hell alone and let them govern themselves, like a democracy, would there ever have been any Russia-Ukraine war? It's possible, but is it likely? Not in the view of this reporter, it isn't. And yes, each time you hear some sanctimonious Democrat pretend to be outraged about foreign election interference, you should throw Ukraine 2014 directly in that person's smug little face, and you should pose the question, how come it's okay when you guys do it? It's Friday, the 15th of August. This is Curmudgeon's Corner. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the gift shop's going to be closed for 2 weeks for remortaring, and we do apologize for any inconvenience. Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to Curmudgeon's Corner. Let's talk about the challenges of monologue writing, because I've had a bit of a problem lately, where I'll sit down to write an episode about some current day news event, and I get so deep into the historical background that it just winds up being a history video, but today, I think I'm just going to go with it. So we are going to talk about the Reykjavik summit of October 1986 between President Ronald Reagan and General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Supreme Soviet, Mikhail Gorbachev. And boy, those Soviets sure did love their long, unwieldy job titles, didn't they? Now, if you're too young to remember, or so old you forgot, Reykjavik was a real inflection point in world history. It ended in failure, the talks broke down, no agreements were concluded, everyone went home unhappier than the crowd at a Colorado Rockies game. But for a brief, shining moment, around 20 to 30 minutes in the event, the parties stood on the precipice of an agreement to outlaw all nuclear weapons forever. And just imagine how drastically different things might look today had that agreement been brought to fruition. Russia having nukes is the only thing that makes them able to impersonate a world power. Russia having nukes is the only reason NATO still exists. It's arguably the only reason the European Union exists in its current form. What are America's aims at this weekend's summit meeting? Well, President Trump's been very clear on that. He hopes to get Putin to agree to a follow-up meeting as soon as possible where he sits across the table from Muscle Shirt Jesus with Trump as the mediator and they hammer out a peace agreement and the killing stops. What are Russia's aims? Well, Russia's aims are the same as they've been for most of the last 1,000 years. They want to be viewed as a great power. They want to be the imperial hegemon of all the Slavic peoples. And they want the Crimean Peninsula to be permanently and exclusively Russian in both the de facto sense and the de jure sense. Can they achieve any of that without holding the trump card of a nuclear weapons stockpile? Well, it's possible, but it's damned unlikely. So it's worth wondering just how big of a mistake it was when Gorbachev put the offer on the table, let's get rid of all nukes forever, and Reagan couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger because he didn't want to give up a weapons system that never existed in the first place. It was called SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, and the news media, because they're idiots, insisted on calling it Star Wars. The idea was that we would place a bunch of satellites in orbit and they'd have some fancy sort of laser shooty things on them, and if some hostile foreign power tried to fire ICBMs at us, we could pick those bad boys off like... Well, shit, I guess it was kind of like Star Wars, wasn't it? The point being, this thing never got any closer to reality than a few pieces of computer animation that were, admittedly, quite impressive for the mid-1980s. Almost as impressive as that one Dire Straits video. Even today, it's uncertain whether we can build it, though Trump very much wants to build it. Though he has changed the nickname from Star Wars to Golden Dome. He is Donald Trump, after all, so obviously the name has to have gold in it. Speaking of gold, have you seen the Oval Office lately? I'm not going to say it looks more and more like a Liberace stage set, but I could say that if I wanted to. No man has ever loved a thing more than Trump loves the color gold. If Biden had the same design sensibilities as Trump does, he would have had a gold-plated CPAP machine and a gold-plated adult diaper. Shit, I went on a bit of a comedy tangent there, didn't I? What's the video about, Jim Eagle? Oh, right, Reykjavik. And I just want to say to the Icelanders, you know you're living in a very important country when the biggest thing that ever happened in your capital city was a failed meeting between two foreign leaders 40 years ago. And boy, I'm so hungry I could eat a double handful of lutefisk. Wait, no, I'm not. I'll actually never be that hungry. It's like chewing a roof shingle that a homeless man pissed on 5 days ago. My God, will somebody get me back on track here? So Gorbachev goes to Reykjavik with the intention that we get rid of all nuclear ballistic missiles, your SRBMs, your MRBMs, your ICBMs, the whole smash. But Star Wars is their red line. No pun intended. They're unwilling to agree to any sort of major arms limitation treaty unless we agree to shit-can Star Wars. And their espionage operations must not have been what they were back during the war, because they seem to have had not the faintest idea that Star Wars was never a real thing. It was just a cartoon. No, not that cartoon. Reagan goes to Reykjavik and he's willing to play ball on getting rid of certain classes of nuclear missiles, but he also wants to talk about human rights in the Soviet Union. He wants to talk about the mistreatment of Soviet Jews, and he wants to talk about them ending their invasion of Afghanistan, to which the Soviets say, that's a hard niet there, cowboy. We're only talking missiles here, and that's it. Gorbachev doesn't want Reagan to know he's willing to get rid of all ballistic missiles. So he opens with an offer of let's get rid of 50% of all ballistic missiles over the next 10 years. And then Reagan counters with the same offer that Gorbachev had planned on making eventually. Why not get rid of 100% of ballistic missiles over the next 10 years? But damn it, I am not giving up Star Wars. Well, this puts Gorbachev on the back foot because, god damn it, this guy just stole my offer. That wasn't supposed to happen. So what counter-proposal can I now come up with to try and regain my negotiating leverage? So he decides to push all of his chips to the center of the table. Okay, big shot, how about let's ban all nuclear weapons forever? But you have to give up Star Wars. And actually, he didn't even demand that Star Wars be got rid of altogether. He just wanted an assurance that there would be no real-world testing of the thing. You can work on it in the laboratory. You can run all the simulations you want. Hell, you can even build the hardware for all I care. but you won't deploy any satellites and you won't do any live fire testing. Now, does it seem strange that Reagan would be so reticent to walk away from a weapon system that was never even a real thing? A thing we are still struggling to figure out how to build 40 years later? Yes, it does seem strange, and I think it's fair to say the world has paid a heavy price for his reticence. And he really wrestled with the decision during those fateful 20 to 30 minutes. He says, damn it, I campaigned for re-election in 1984 telling people that SDI was actively in development and it might be ready to deploy during my second term. And then we will all be permanently safe from any Soviet nuclear attack. But if I agree to this deal, that means I'll have to tell the people of the United States that was all a bunch of horse shit, that we never had anything more than a couple of fancy cartoons. No, not that cartoon. And I'll have to tell that to the Russians too, and when I make that admission, then they will be able to portray me as a liar and a dishonest broker. So nope, sorry, no deal, can't do it, wouldn't be prudent. But again, all Gorbachev was asking for was that Star Wars testing be confined to the laboratory for a period of 10 years, which is all they were doing anyway. So it's a pretty unavoidable conclusion that there were serious flaws in Reagan's thinking here. The research that was ongoing would have been allowed to continue. Any public disclosure wouldn't have come in all likelihood until well after he left office. And he passed up the chance to denuclearize the globe over reasons that were largely non-applicable anyway. Am I still a Reagan fan? You bet your ass. I love me some Ronald Reagan. But the failure of Reykjavik, when the permanent eradication of all nuclear weapons was sitting right there on the table, just a handshake away, is probably the single biggest stain on his presidential track record. And in a variety of ways, the world is still paying a price for it. I am done. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. See you Sunday. Blast Radius 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Until then, get off my lawn.